Today we're going to learn how to make a tool. This is what the tool looks like. First, we need a plastic container. This is going to be used to make the backing of the tool. Now we need a rubber glove as well. The rubber glove should have no cloth on the inside and also none on the outside. We're using this glove to get some rubber material. And we're just going to make a cut around there, and then we're going to have a sheet of rubber to work with, thin rubber. We need some scissors. These will be used for cutting. We need some tongue and groove pliers as well. A rotary tool, something similar, and some contact cement. We also need a screw mandrel. And this is sort of what it looks like. You can buy lots of them on eBay for very cheap. And this is contour sanding sponge. This is roughly what it looks like. This is fine grit. In this case, you can probably use other grits as well. And that's what it looks like. You can substitute something that you can get in your area where you live. See, it's thin, it's sponge, and it has grit on the outside. That's the main idea. You need some sort of a similar product. And this is going to be glued onto the backing. That's another look at it. And you can see the sponge, and you can see the grit too, on the front and back. You also need a screwdriver, a slot head screwdriver, small one. That's what it looks like. And also some sort of a concrete screw. This one has a square end, and it's used to make a hole through the backing and the sponge. I found it, a concrete screw works well for this purpose. Could probably use something else as well, something sharp. This is drywall. I've just cut it into pieces. Maybe 1 foot by 1 foot. Or 12 inches by 12 inches. The exact size doesn't matter. Now we're going to start. We're going to take the plastic container, which should have a little bit of flex and a little bit of thickness to it, and we're going to start cutting. We're trying to get a sheet of plastic out of this plastic container. This is going to be the backing of the tool. You can see how I make the cuts. It's really simple to do. And we're recycling something and making a tool out of it. I got this from a grocery store. You can probably use lots of other different types of containers as well. Find something that works for you. It's relatively thin. It has a little bit of flex. And now I have to bend it or roll it backwards to make it straight and flat. Because it used to be in a round shape. What I really want is a sheet of plastic. And this is how I get it. Sort of thin plastic. I'm not sure if it's called plastic film or what it's called, but it's just thin plastic from a container. And here's the rubber glove. Again, there's no cloth on the inside. And we're just going to make a cut on the outside. And we want the glove for material. This was the easiest way I could find to get a sheet of this thin rubber. I just cut it out of another product. I'm sure there's lots of rubber gloves on the market. They're easy to get. So there we go. I'm just cutting, and again I want a sheet of rubber, thin rubber, like that. And this is going to be used later on. So there's this little ridge on the end. I'm going to cut that off too. The rubber is eventually going to be glued onto the backing, and we're going to make a little rubber plastic washer, which is going to hold the assembly together and stop it from skidding or spinning. It sort of grips, the rubber grips the rest of the tool. That's why it needs to be rubber. So now we have the backing and we have the rubber. They're going to be glued together eventually. Now I have some contour sanding sponge and a piece of the plastic. So I'm going to take some contact cement and I'm going to paint it onto the plastic. And it's still wet at this point, and that's fine. I'm going to put a fair bit on just to make sure that I get a good bond. And it's still wet, and I'm putting the contour sanding sponge on top. Now I'm going to put a piece of drywall over top like this. The purpose of doing this is to keep it flat when it's drying. So I'm squishing it and flattening it as it's drying. Now I'm going to take some more contact cement and put it on another sheet of the plastic. Now I'm going to glue the rubber onto this plastic. And this is going to be used to make the plastic rubber washers, which stop the contour sanding foam and plastic from spinning or from slipping when they're spinning, because there's some torque on this assembly, and we don't want it to slip. And rubber grips quite well. It's like, there is the rubber sheet. Now I'm going to figure out how to fit it onto this plastic. So I'm just going to make a cut. The main idea is just to stick it onto the plastic and then to make sure that it's smooth. It can be in pieces or in one whole piece, whatever is most convenient for you. I'm sort of laminating them together, and that's really what I want to do. I just want pieces of laminated plastic and rubber. Or they're glued, whatever the word is. See, now I smooth out the rubber, and I make sure there are no bumps in it. And then I put some drywall on top, and I put some weights on top. Whatever weights you happen to have. It's just has to be heavy. I happen to have some rocks around here. You can use whatever tools, whatever you happen to have that's heavy. So we're squishing it tight. Now after 24 hours, when it's all dry, I take the weights off, and now I have my glued together pieces of plastic and rubber and foam. There's the contour sanding foam. And this is what it looks like. I used another sheet of plastic. You can use lots of different types. And there's the plastic and rubber glued together. So this is what I want. Now I have this sheets of this stuff which is glued together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some scissors and I'm going to cut the edges off of the backing. And now I know exactly where the sanding sponge is underneath when I make the little circles or discs. So now I take a ruler and it's about 4 centimeters, 3.5 to 4 centimeters. You have to see what works for you. You can make it bigger or smaller. I found if I make it too big, it doesn't work very well. The disc starts slipping. So 4 centimeters, and in the middle I make a line. So at the 2 centimeter mark, and then I know I can make another cross like that. And that gives me about the dimensions of the tool. It doesn't have to be perfectly round. You could also use some sort of a round template, and then you can make them perfectly. But I found it doesn't make much of a difference. That's about the right size. And now I take some scissors and I cut it out. Pretty easy. Just watch your fingers. There's the disc. On the one side is the contour sanding sponge, and on the other side is the plastic backing. Now I take a concrete screw and I make a little hole in the back. I take a hammer and I tap a little hole in there. Just a little one, just enough to get the screw of the screw mandrel through it. So I just twist it a little bit, and I also come in from the front, and there we go. Now I can get the screw through there. Pretty simple. Now comes the point where I'm going to make some plastic rubber washers. Again, I'm going to trim the excess plastic off of the backing like this. Now I'm just going to cut some little squares like this, and I'm going to cut them around, cut the edges off them and make them round. Again, watch your fingers. So there we go. So these are the little plastic rubber washers. Again, it doesn't have to be very exact. It doesn't have to be perfectly round. There you go. And there's one. Now I'm going to make another one. This one's about the size of a quarter. This one's for the back. The first one was for the front. And again, I'm just going to take some scissors and cut out the disc or plastic rubber washer. This is really key because these washers keep everything held together. If you just use plastic, the contour sanding sponge disc starts to spin or slip when it's being used. Now this is how you can use the concrete screw to make a hole through the plastic. You sort of twist it a little bit, and you get a little hole in there. Now I take the screw and I take a hammer and I tap a little bit, and I've got a hole in the back washer and in the front washer. Like that. I go from one side, twist a little bit, tap a little bit, or I'm twisting. Now I'm going to come in from the front and tap again and make the hole a little bit bigger. Just enough to get the screw through, just barely. So this is what it looks like. This is the back one. This is the contour sanding disc. And there's the backing on the back and the sponge on the front. And this is the little washer for the front of the tool. And there's the screw from the screw mandrel. Now I put the screw through like this, and notice the rubber is on the bottom. This is important. And now I push the screw through the contour sanding sponge disc. And now the back plastic rubber washer is pushed on the back. So you notice it's like a rubber sandwich. The rubber is touching the back, and the rubber is touching the front grit. And this is important because it grips. It's like rubber, where the rubber meets the road. Rubber and grit work well. Like that. So the rubber is down, facing the grit on the contour sanding sponge, and now I'm holding it with tongue and groove pliers and tightening it using a screwdriver. Make it nice and tight. It's a little hard to film and do this, but you got the idea. You want the whole thing really tight, so that the rubber is, the washers are compressed into the foam. This is what it looks like when it's tight. There, and now the rubber is gripping the back of the tool, the rubber face down. See, you can see like that. The plastic is visible, and the rubber is gripping the grit on the contour sanding sponge. And it's nice and tight. This is important. This is what it looks like in the tool. And you can see I've used the tool by this point, so it's a little bit dirty, but that means it's working. The grit is removing material, and that's what it needs to do. See, and there's a screw down there. You don't want that screw to touch what you're polishing, because it'll scratch it. So the tool is used on an angle, and only, see it, look, it has a little bit of flex. The plastic has a little bit of flex to it, and that's how it should be. And it's also a little bit stiff. So this is the tool in action. Now I'm holding it, and I'm turning it on, and I use it on speed 3, no faster. And the idea here is to use it very lightly. You don't want to push hard. You just want to use it very lightly, and you just want to use the outside of the disc. So it's used on a slight angle. So the screw never touches the material that you're polishing. And because it's spinning and the plastic has a little bit of flex to it, it works pretty well. See, it's always used on a little bit of an angle, and it's only the outside of the disc that's used. The middle of the disc never touches the material you're working with, and this is possible because you're using it on an angle a little bit. See, the screw is never touching the material, and only the outside of the disc is actually touching. And I'm going lightly, and I'm going slow, and I'm letting the rotary tool, which spins very, very quickly, I'm letting it just keep removing material slowly, slowly, slowly. And if you don't press hard, the sandpaper or sanding sponge lasts longer because it doesn't get hot. And you have to be patient and just let it spin and spin and spin and remove material. I just tried this with fine sanding sponge. You could probably use it with other grits as well. And I just keep going and going and going, and it polishes. I also used it on, it has to be used on a flat surface.